Did you know Elvis Presley once physically confronted a director on set, nearly coming to blows over a scene he despised? Or that one of his co-stars suffered a near-fatal head injury during a stunt gone wrong, right before his eyes? Imagine being forced to sing songs you absolutely loathed, recording them through gritted teeth for movies you didn't even want to make. That was often Elvis's reality. And believe it or not, the king of rock and roll sometimes took home less money from his blockbuster films than his controlling manager. Get ready, because the glossy image projected on screen often hid a much more complicated, sometimes frustrating, and occasionally dangerous reality behind the cameras. Number 9. Colonel Parker pooled ALL, the strings, and we mean ALL of them. It's impossible to talk about Elvis's movie career without talking about Colonel Tom Parker, his larger-than-life, cigar-chomping manager. Parker wasn't just a manager, he was the architect, the gatekeeper, and the ultimate decision-maker for nearly every aspect of Elvis's Hollywood journey. While Elvis brought the talent, the charisma, and the global fame, Parker brought an iron will and a business acumen focused squarely on maximizing profit. Often, critics argued at the expense of artistic quality or Elvis's own desires. From the very beginning, Parker saw movies not just as an artistic medium, but as a powerful engine for selling records, merchandise, and the Elvis brand itself. He negotiated deals that were groundbreaking in their time, securing unprecedented salaries and profit participation for his client. However, this control extended far beyond just the financials. Parker had final say on scripts, song selections, co-stars, directors, and even the promotional campaigns. If a script didn't fit the specific Elvis formula Parker envisioned, usually a light-hearted plot involving fistfights, pretty girls, and a handful of catchy, though often forgettable songs, it was likely rejected. He preferred directors who were known for working quickly and staying on budget, rather than those with strong artistic visions that might clash with his own commercial instincts. This meant Elvis was often locked into contracts for multiple pictures with studios, churning out films that became increasingly formulaic and critically panned as the 1960s wore on. Parker famously believed that fans wanted the same Elvis movie over and over again, just with different scenery and song titles. He resisted any attempt to deviate from this formula, fearing it would alienate the core audience and disrupt the steady stream of income the movies generated. This tight control meant that potential collaborators who might have pushed Elvis in new directions, or scripts that offered more dramatic substance, were often kept at arm's length or dismissed outright. Parker even dictated details down to the types of promotional photos released and the taglines used on movie posters. His presence loomed large over every production, a constant reminder of who was truly in charge of the Elvis Presley movie machine. He wasn't just managing a career, he was meticulously crafting and controlling the multi-million-dollar enterprise, and the movies were a crucial, non-negotiable part of that empire. This level of control was unusual even by Hollywood standards and became a defining and often frustrating characteristic of Elvis's time on the silver screen. Parker's philosophy was simple: keep it light, keep it cheap, keep it profitable, and keep Elvis working. The artistic aspirations of his client were, more often than not, a secondary consideration to the bottom line. Number 8. Elvis craved serious roles, but his dream was constantly stilted. Beneath the swiveling hips and the charming grin seen in films like Blue Hawaii or Girls, 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 Elvis Presley harbored a genuine ambition to be taken seriously as an actor. He deeply admired performers like Marlon Brando and James Dean, actors known for their intense dramatic work. Early in his film career, particularly with movies like King Creole, directed by Michael Curtiz, who helmed Casablanca, and Flaming Star, directed by Don Siegel, later known for Dirty Harry, Elvis showed flashes of real dramatic potential. Critics even acknowledged his raw talent and screen presence in these roles. He received positive reviews for his portrayal of troubled youths, suggesting a path towards more substantial acting might be possible. Elvis himself spoke numerous times about his desire to tackle challenging characters and complex narratives. He reportedly read scripts for potentially meatier roles and expressed interest in projects that deviated from the musical comedies he became known for. He saw acting not just as another facet of his fame, but as a craft he wanted to develop and excel at. However, this artistic ambition constantly ran up against the commercial strategy dictated by Colonel Parker and the studios. Parker focused on maximizing profits and maintaining the established Elvis brand, saw dramatic roles as risky. They might not perform as well at the box office. They wouldn't easily accommodate the requisite number of hit songs needed for soundtrack albums, a huge revenue stream, and they might confuse or alienate the fans who expected the light-hearted escapism of his typical films. The Elvis formula, exotic locations, beautiful co-stars, a few fights, and a dozen songs, was incredibly lucrative. Studios knew exactly what they were getting and how to market it. Deviating from this successful template was seen as unnecessary and potentially damaging to the bottom line. Therefore, despite Elvis's own wishes, the scripts that landed on his lap became increasingly lightweight and interchangeable. He was offered roles that required little more than smiling, singing, and occasionally throwing a punch. Potential opportunities for more serious films, like a proposed role in West Side Story or offers for films that required him to stretch his acting muscles, were allegedly turned down by Parker without Elvis even being fully aware of them, or they were dismissed due to scheduling conflicts created by the relentless pace of his movie production schedule. This led to immense frustration for Elvis, who felt trapped in a creative rut. He knew he was capable of more, but the system built around him prioritized box office returns over artistic growth. He would often complain privately to friends and members of his entourage, the Memphis Mafia, about the poor quality of the scripts and the silliness of the plots he was forced to enact. He longed for a role that would allow him to truly disappear into a character to prove his mettle as a dramatic actor, but the machinery of his own stardom, tightly controlled by Parker, kept pushing him back towards the familiar, profitable, but ultimately unfulfilling path of the musical comedy. His early promise remained largely untapped, a source of lasting regret for the king himself. Number 7. The chemistry with Anne Margaret was real, and it made people nervous. When Elvis Presley and Anne Margaret stormed onto the screen together in 1964's Viva Las Vegas, the sparks weren't just acting, they were practically nuclear. Their on-screen chemistry was electric, palpable, and considered by many fans and critics to be the best pairing of Elvis's entire film career. They matched each other in energy, charisma, and sheer star power. The musical numbers sizzled, the banter popped, and the connection between their characters felt incredibly genuine. This wasn't just a standard movie romance. It felt like watching two dynamos ignite the screen. Behind the scenes, that chemistry translated into a real-life, passionate, albeit relatively short-lived romance. Both young, talented, and at the height of their fame, they were drawn to each other. They shared interests, understood the pressures of stardom, and genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Reports from the set described them as inseparable, often spending time together between takes, sharing jokes, and rehearsing their scenes with an intensity that blurred the lines between performance and reality. Their connection was so obvious and intense that it reportedly made Colonel Parker quite uneasy. Parker liked to keep tight control over Elvis's image and personal life, seeing anything that could potentially complicate the brand or generate negative publicity as a threat. A serious romance, especially with a rising star like Anne Margaret, who had her own burgeoning career and wasn't simply an accessory to Elvis, didn't fit neatly into Parker's plans. He preferred Elvis's romantic life to be portrayed as relatively unattached, preserving the fantasy for his legion of female fans. Furthermore, Elvis was already unofficially involved with Priscilla Bowley back in Memphis. The burgeoning relationship with Anne Margaret created a complicated personal situation for Elvis and potential fodder for gossip columns, something Parker detested unless he could control the narrative. The press naturally picked up on the intense connection, fueling rumors and speculation about marriage. This publicity, while perhaps good for the film's box office, worried Parker regarding its potential long-term impact on Elvis's carefully managed public persona and his relationship with Priscilla. While the exact nature and duration of their off-screen relationship remain subjects of some debate and discretion from those involved, it's widely acknowledged that it was significant and deeply felt by both stars. Anne Margaret herself has spoken fondly, though carefully, about her time with Elvis, referring to him as her soulmate in her autobiography, while acknowledging the complexities of the situation. The filming of Viva Las Vegas captured a unique moment where professional collaboration and genuine personal affection collided, resulting in a cinematic energy that was impossible to fake and difficult for anyone, including Colonel Parker, to ignore or fully control. It remains a Tannhäuser film in Elvis's catalog, largely due to that undeniable, electrifying chemistry between its two leads. Number 6. That nasty head injury on the set of Clam Bake was no joke. Elvis movies were generally light affairs filled with songs, romance, and maybe a few choreographed fistfights. They weren't typically known for dangerous stunts or serious on-set accidents. However, the production of the 1967 film Clam Bake took a frightening turn that reminded everyone of the potential risks involved, even in seemingly harmless productions. During the filming, Elvis, playing an air pretending to be a water ski instructor, was involved in numerous scenes on the water. While Elvis often performed many of his own less dangerous activities, complex or potentially hazardous sequences usually involved stunt doubles. However, sometimes even relatively simple setups could go wrong. In one instance, not involving Elvis directly, but happening nearby during production, a mishap occurred that resulted in a serious injury. More significantly for Elvis personally, there was an incident during filming where he himself suffered a concerning injury. While details vary slightly depending on the source, the most commonly reported incident involved Elvis, either during filming or perhaps between takes tripping or falling on set. Accounts suggest he tripped over a television cord or some other piece of equipment in his dressing room, or possibly on the soundstage itself. The fall resulted in Elvis hitting his head quite hard, leading to what was described as a significant concussion. This wasn't just a minor bump. It was serious enough to cause concern among the cast and crew and required medical attention. The injury reportedly caused Elvis considerable pain, dizziness, and disorientation. Production had to be temporarily halted or adjusted to accommodate his recovery. This incident came at a time when Elvis was already reportedly growing increasingly disillusioned with the repetitive nature of his film roles and the often subpar quality of the material he was given. Clambake in particular represented a low point for him, creatively featuring a silly plot and songs he openly disliked, like Confidence. Suffering a physical injury, a notable concussion, while working on a project he already found tedious and uninspiring likely compounded his frustration and unhappiness during this period. It served as a stark, physical manifestation of the discomfort he felt with the direction his movie career had taken. While injuries can happen on any film set, this particular incident during Clambake stands out because it affected the star directly and significantly, highlighting the physical toll that even seemingly light-hearted filmmaking could take, especially when coupled with the mental strain of creative dissatisfaction. It was a painful reminder that behind the movie magic, real people were doing a job, and sometimes that job involved unexpected hazards. Number 5. He openly HED. Some of the ridiculous songs he had to sing. Imagine being the king of rock and roll, a global music icon who revolutionized popular music, and then being forced to sing songs like Old MacDonald Had a Farm or Yoga is as yoga does for a movie soundtrack. That was the often bizarre reality for Elvis Presley during his Hollywood years. While his early movie soundtracks produced massive hits like Jailhouse Rock, Love Me Tender, and Can't Help Falling in Love, the musical quality declined dramatically as the 1960s progressed and the films became more formulaic. Colonel Parker and the studios demanded numerous songs for each film to fill lucrative soundtrack albums, often prioritizing quantity over quality. This meant songwriters were churning out tunes specifically tailored to fit often ludicrous plot points, resulting in tracks that were thematically silly, musically weak, and far removed from the rock and roll and rhythm and blues roots that made Elvis famous. Elvis, who had a deep appreciation for gospel blues and country music, grew increasingly frustrated and embarrassed by the material he was contractually obligated to record. He had impeccable musical taste, but he was often overruled by Parker and music publishers who controlled the song selection process, frequently favoring songs from specific publishing houses they had deals with, regardless of artistic merit. There are numerous accounts from musicians and members of the Memphis Mafia about Elvis's disdain for some of these movie songs. He reportedly balked at recording tracks like Dominic the Impotent Bull from Stay Away Joe, finding the title and lyrics utterly ridiculous. He allegedly detested Yoga is as Yoga does from Easy Come, Easy Go, making his contempt clear during the recording session. Singing nursery rhymes like Old MacDonald in Double Trouble was another low point that reportedly mortified him. He often recorded these songs quickly with little enthusiasm, sometimes trying to get through them in as few takes as possible just to fulfill his contractual requirements. His lack of passion is sometimes audible on the final recordings, a stark contrast to the power and conviction he brought to his non-movie recordings during the same era, like his stunning gospel work or his 1968 comeback special Materia. He knew the songs were often subpar, and it wounded his pride as a serious musician. He felt the absurdity of the movie tunes diluted his musical legacy and turned him into a parody of himself. This wasn't just about artistic disagreement. It was about being forced repeatedly to perform material he genuinely believed was terrible, all for the sake of feeding the Hollywood movie machine that prioritized soundtrack sales over musical integrity. His frustration was palpable to those around him, a constant source of tension behind the scenes of his later films. Number 4. Sods were often so bad, he'd ad-lib or make fun of the lines. As Elvis Presley's movie career rolled into the mid to late 1960s, the quality of the scripts he received often took a nosedive. The Elvis formula demanded light plots, predictable romances, and plenty of song cues, leaving little room for character development, witty dialogue, or engaging storylines. The scripts frequently relied on clichés, nonsensical plots, and dialogue that was, frankly, often quite wooden or downright silly. Faced with material he found uninspired or even embarrassing, Elvis sometimes took matters into his own hands on set, albeit in subtle ways. He wasn't known for demanding wholesale script rewrites. Colonel Parker's control likely would have prevented that anyway. But he would occasionally inject his own personality, humor, or ad-libbed lines into scenes, particularly when the scripted dialogue felt unnatural or ridiculous to him. Members of his entourage and some co-stars have recounted instances where Elvis, perhaps bored or frustrated with a scene, would subtly play with the lines, deliver them with a knowing wink, or add a small, unscripted piece of business or a quip. Sometimes this was done purely for the amusement of himself and the crew, a way to cope with the tedium of filming yet another formulaic scene. He might make a funny face, exaggerate a reaction, or mumble a sarcastic aside under his breath that might or might not make the final cut. In other cases, his ad-libs were genuine attempts to make a scene feel more authentic or to inject some life into flat dialogue. He had natural comedic timing and charisma, and sometimes his spontaneous additions were actually improvements on the written word, adding a touch of the real Elvis charm that the script lacked. Directors varied in their reactions. Some were likely annoyed by the deviations, while others might have recognized that Elvis's instincts were good and allowed the small changes, especially if they elicited a better performance or a more genuine moment. This tendency to subtly mock or alter the material also reflected his growing disillusionment. It was a way of signaling, perhaps unconsciously, his detachment from the often flimsy roles he was playing. While he remained professional and completed his work, these small acts of improvisation or subtle mockery were glimpses of the artist beneath the surface, chafing against the creative constraints imposed upon him. He knew many of the scripts were weak, and his occasional ad-libs or playful disregard for the written lines were a manifestation of that awareness and his underlying desire for something more substantial. It wasn't outright rebellion, but rather small personal ways of coping with and commenting on the often subpar quality of his cinematic assignments. Number 3. The grueling schedule and weight. Fluctuations became visible on screen. Making movies might seem glamorous, but for Elvis Presley it often meant a relentless, grueling schedule dictated by Colonel Parker and the studios. Parker believed in keeping Elvis constantly working, moving from one film project to the next with little time in between. Typically, Elvis would make 3 movies a year during the peak of his Hollywood phase in the 1960s. This meant a near-constant cycle of pre-production, including recording the often subpar soundtracks, filming on location or sound stages, and brief promotional duties before starting the entire process over again. This demanding schedule left little room for rest, relaxation, or pursuing other creative interests. The pressure to constantly perform, coupled with his growing dissatisfaction with the film material, began to take a toll on Elvis both mentally and physically. This physical toll became increasingly visible on screen as the years went by. Early Elvis films showcased a lean, energetic young man. However, by the mid to late 1960s, fluctuations in his weight became noticeable from one film to the next, sometimes even within the same film due to shooting schedules. Several factors contributed to this. The stress and boredom of the movie grind sometimes led to unhealthy eating habits. Life on set often involves long periods of waiting punctuated by intense activity, catering tables laden with food, and late-night shoots, none of which are conducive to maintaining peak physical condition. Furthermore, Elvis dealt with various health issues over the years, and prescription medication use, which reportedly increased during stressful periods, could also have side effects impacting his weight and overall appearance. Fans watching his films chronologically could observe these changes. In some movies, he appeared heavier and slightly lethargic, lacking the raw energy of his earlier performances. Costumes sometimes had to be adjusted, and camera angles or lighting might have been used to present him in the most flattering way possible. While he always retained his undeniable charisma, the physical changes reflected the strain he was under. Comedies like Clam Bake, Stay Away, Joe, and Live a Little, Love a Little, all filmed in the latter half of the 1960s, show a visibly different Elvis compared to his appearances in Jail, House, Rock, or Viva Las Vegas. This wasn't just natural aging. It was the visual evidence of a demanding lifestyle, professional frustration, and underlying health concerns, playing out on the silver screen. The films inadvertently became a visual record of the pressures bearing down on the king, a stark contrast between the carefree characters he often played and the increasingly complex reality of his own life off-camera. Number 2. He nearly came to blows with a director over a hated scene. Elvis Presley was generally known for being polite and professional on set, respectful of directors and crew members. He wasn't typically confrontational. However, his frustration with the declining quality of his movies and his desire for more control over his work occasionally boiled over. One of the most notable instances involved a clash with veteran director Norman Taurog, who directed Elvis in numerous films, including some of his most formulaic outings, like Girls, and It Happened at the World's Fair. While Taurog was known for working quickly and efficiently fitting Colonel Parker's desire for budget-conscious productions, his style sometimes clashed with Elvis's artistic sensibilities, particularly as Elvis grew more weary of the repetitive material. The specific incident recounted by members of Elvis's entourage and alluded to in various biographies reportedly occurred during the filming of Blue Hawaii, or possibly one of their later collaborations. The details suggest Elvis strongly objected to a particular scene or piece of direction he found nonsensical, embarrassing, or detrimental to his character or performance. Sources describe Elvis becoming increasingly agitated, arguing heatedly with Taurog about the issue. The disagreement allegedly escalated beyond just words, with Elvis becoming physically confrontational. Accounts suggest Elvis grabbed Taurog or made a move towards him in anger, stopping just short of actual physical violence, or perhaps involving some pushing or shoving. Members of the crew and Elvis's own friends had to intervene to separate them and de-escalate the situation before it got completely out of hand. This kind of outburst was highly uncharacteristic for Elvis on a film set, and spoke volumes about the level of frustration he was experiencing. He felt trapped, creatively stifled, and forced to participate in scenes or films he didn't believe in. This confrontation with Taurog, a director he had worked with multiple times, represented a breaking point, a moment where his pent-up resentment towards the system controlling his movie career manifested in a rare display of anger. While the specific scene that triggered the conflict isn't always clearly identified, the underlying cause was Elvis's deep-seated dissatisfaction with the direction his Hollywood career had taken and his perceived lack of agency in the creative process. It was a stark reminder that beneath the amiable public persona, Elvis was an artist with strong opinions and passions, and pushing him too far, especially regarding work he found demeaning, could provoke a powerful reaction. The near-physical altercation highlighted the immense pressure and creative conflict simmering just beneath the surface of his seemingly carefree movie roles. Number 1. The King's Ransom. Sometimes Parker took home more than Elvis. Elvis Presley was one of the biggest movie stars in the world during the late 1950s and 1960s. His films consistently made money, and he commanded huge salaries and profit participation deals that were unprecedented for the time. You'd assume he was personally banking astronomical sums from his Hollywood ventures. While he certainly earned a great deal of money, the financial reality was far more complex, largely due to the unique and often controversial arrangement he had with his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Parker's management contract with Elvis was highly unusual. Standard management commissions in the entertainment industry were typically around 10 to 15%. Parker, however, eventually secured himself a staggering 50% of Elvis's total earnings across all ventures, records, movies, merchandise, appearances. This 50-50 split applied after certain expenses, but essentially meant that for every dollar Elvis earned, Parker took 50 cents. This arrangement extended to Elvis's film deals. While Elvis might be guaranteed a $1 million salary plus a percentage of the profits for a film, huge numbers for the era, Parker would automatically receive half of that amount as his commission. But Parker's financial involvement often went deeper. He sometimes negotiated package deals where he acted not just as Elvis's manager, but also as a producer or consultant, percentages directly from the studio, separate from his cut of Elvis's earnings. Furthermore, Parker was known for his shrewd negotiation tactics that prioritized guaranteed upfront money over potentially larger black cow profits, ensuring a steady cash flow, but perhaps limiting Elvis's ultimate take if a film became a massive blockbuster. There were also numerous expenses associated with Elvis's career and lifestyle, paying his entourage, the Memphis Mafia, security, travel, maintaining Graceland, and Parker's own operational costs, which came out of Elvis's share after Parker took his 50%. When you factor in taxes on top of Parker's massive commission and the substantial overheads, Elvis's net take-home pay from a specific film project could sometimes be significantly less than half of the headline salary figure. This financial structure, while making both men very wealthy, heavily favored Parker and gave him enormous leverage. It also meant that Parker had a vested interest in keeping Elvis working constantly in familiar, profitable formulas rather than risking lower immediate returns on more artistically ambitious projects. The sheer amount Parker took effectively meant Elvis had to earn twice as much just to keep the same amount as another star might with a standard management deal. This staggering 50% commission remained a point of contention and analysis for years after Elvis's death, highlighting the extraordinary level of financial control Parker exerted over his client's massively successful, yet complicated, Hollywood career. The king made a fortune, but his manager ensured he received an equal and sometimes arguably greater share of the kingdom's wealth.